Hello everyone, this is Charlie with Battlers Connection. Today we're going to do an assembly video of the new injection molded large bilge pump. Cover a couple components and then we'll get started. From left to right we have our sample motor here. This could be any brushed motor, could be a brushless motor, whichever you choose. We just chose to do a brushed motor for this assembly video. You have a piece of filter screen. You have four 440 by 5/16 cap screws, four 440 by 1/2 inch cap screws, two M3 by 8 cap screws, a small seal ring, a seal ring for the motor plate. This will be a vapor lock plug. When you look at it, you'll see that there's a hole drilled in the end of it. I'll discuss that in a little bit. We have the 1/8 inch impeller, which we also have a 4mm impeller and a 5mm impeller available. But this particular video, we're going to cover just the 1/8 inch. You have the motor plate. We'll discuss the motor plate. It has a groove in here that you'll install the seal ring. It has a 1/2 inch through hole that's generally more associated around brush motors for the bushing. But the brushless motors, some of them have a snap ring that holds the assembly together, so the snap ring would ride inside this pocket. And then you have two mounting positions, which are 25mm spacing between centers. So most of your motors you'll need to verify and make sure that it'll have a 25mm spacing. This will be your pump body. There's an opening here. It has the 9/32 brass tube, which is molded in position. And the process that it's molded in, you should never be able to remove this. It should never come loose. It should never fall out. You should never be able to pull it out. So that's molded in place. This is your port for your 1032 threaded port for the vapor lock plug. In the base of it, you'll see some standoffs. You'll see a recess around the inlet port. We'll cover that in a little bit. This is your large particle strainer plate. It's a universal fit, so left or right. You'll see pockets. This is the outside. These will be for the heads of the screws to set in. When you look on the internal side of it, you'll see that there's a light recess pocket inside here. So when you mount the two together, it gives you two layers of straining capabilities through the sides all the way around. And you'll see that when it's lined up, that the standoffs on the strainer plate fit in between the standoffs on the motor plate, giving it two levels of strainer. Plus you'll have the strainer here, giving you approximately 3/16 of an inch internal space in here. You'll need a flathead screwdriver. That'll be to install the plug. A 2.5mm driver. That's for the two motor mount M3 screws. A 3/32 driver, and you'll need a .050 Allen wrench. To start out with, we'll go ahead and start with the motor plate. We'll have to install the seal ring, and it's simply just by putting it in place and pressing it into the groove, working all the way around, and then you can slide your thumb or your fingers all the way around to make sure that the seal is seated inside the slot. And there's that. Then what we do then is discuss the motor a little bit. When you're installing a motor, you'll need to make sure that the motor has a flat on it. This flat serves a purpose for being able to lock your component in place, such as this impeller with the set screw. So the set screw will be able to ride on the flat. If your motors have completely round shafts with no flat on it, what you can do is when you do your assembly and you do your setup using a sheet of paper, which I'll cover that in a little bit, you'll set it all up as normal, press it into place, and what you can do is you can use a Sharpie or permanent marker and mark the shaft, slide the impeller on, and just do a light tightening of the set screw, and then slide it back off, and you should be able to see where it's at. And then you can use your Dremel or cut off type saw and actually score a flat on the actual motor shaft. Being this one's done, we'll go ahead and pause the video, I'll install the motor, and then we'll continue on. All right, now we have the motor plate installed. As you can see, I used the two M3 by 8 millimeter cap screws. When installing these two screws, you do not have to really crank down on them. I mean, you just need enough to hold the motor in place. So, use caution with trying not to over torque these particular screws. Next, what we'll do is we'll install this seal. This is a shaft seal. So basically what we're trying to do is this newer style pump has much tighter tolerances than the older style BC large pump. So we see a higher head pressure inside the pump. So we're actually pushing water through the bushing inside the motor. So we installed a seal on here to help control that a little bit. So once you have that installed, you'll then take your impeller and have that ready and have your set screw in position. So we'll go ahead, being that it's right at the surface, I'll go ahead and pre-screw this into place just so I can see it pass into the hole and then back it back out. You can see it right there. Back it back out a little bit so it's clear. And per the instructions, it talks about using a piece of paper. This is just some scrap piece of paper that I got, and I folded it into 3, as you can see, a Z pattern here. So you either use the Z pattern or use a feeler gauge. Most common people are going to use a piece of scrap piece of paper. You can do 3 or 4 bends. I wouldn't go any more than that. Basically what this is doing is it's setting the impeller height against the motor plate. Because most motors, if you grab a hold of the shaft, it has a little in and out play on all motors. So what you're wanting to do is you're spacing it out so if it presses in, that it'll still clear, or at least not bind the motor. When you go to install this, you'll have to set the paper up on here and hold it with another finger, or however you wish to do it. Locate where your flat is at. Set the impeller in place. Make sure your paper's not getting tucked in there like this one is. Press it down. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to hold your finger against the back side of the motor to push the motor shaft out. And then you'll feel you should feel a light compression with the seal on there. Once you have that in place, just tighten your set screw down. And then you pull your paper out. And you should be nice and free. You shouldn't be rubbing or anything like that. If it's rubbing, you may need to take it back loose, add another layer of paper in there. So now that the impeller is installed, we'll set this off to the side and we'll talk about the pump body. As I discussed earlier in the pump body, it has this recess on the bottom of it. This recess is for optional. If you wish to add an insurance policy, I like to call it, this piece of screen. This is approximately 7/8 inch in width and height with the little radiuses on the corners. So basically what you'll need to do is take and cut a piece of screen that'll fit inside of this recess. Try not to go outside of the recess, and the reason being is because you have free space in here. This is to help prevent any kind of restriction to flow to get into the hole. So you're trying to keep your restrictions at a minimum here. So you'll want to install that. You can either use a razor knife or whichever, and you score this surface. Score it really well with a razor knife or X-Acto blade or however you wish to use, sandpaper. I found that a razor knife works the best, and you just score it up really well, and then you'll be able to put your chunk in there and CA it in the corners. We already have one already completed, so I'll set this one off to the side and show you what I've completed here. As you can see, I have the screen installed and I super glued or CA glued the screen into place. Now that we have that, what you'll do is you take your motor, and on the motor plate, you'll notice that it has this elongation off of one side. And in the pump body itself, it has this elongation. So you'll have to make sure that these two are in alignment when you put it in place. So bear in mind, for those with brushless motors, etc., if you have a particular position how you want your motor leads to come out, you'll have to pre-check that in regards to how the elongations have to lock on. So if you need your wires to come out this side or this side, you will have to just remove your screws and turn it into the position that you wish. So I'm going to pause the video. I'll go ahead and install the number 440 by 1/2 inch screws into the four corners of this motor plate and to the opening here of the pump body. All right, we've installed the pump body and the motor plate together. Basically, when you're tightening these, once again, you do not need to exert a lot of torque into tightening these screws. Basically, all you're wanting to do is pull the motor plate where the two plates touch. Because you have an O-ring seal inside here, there's no need to torque the thing. If the edges are touching, you'll notice that there is a resistive fit to the screws. So the screws aren't backing out. So just tighten the screws until there's no more gap between there, and then you'll see you may be able to see a little bit of the edge of the seal with the seals closing off the top of the plate. Next, we'll install the vapor lock plug. The vapor lock plug is mainly for extremely high RPMs like Stingers, some of your brushless guys. The higher the RPM that you run, the more chance that you have to vapor lock a pump, because there's basically a bubble inside, and this is a centrifugal pump. So what happens is basically it locks itself in a bubble, and because of the high RPMs, it's unable to break the bubble and basically prime itself. So the goal here is to have a vent, because generally you have a hose here that it's pumped before and it's filled with water, and it usually retains the water in it. So it has no place for the air to go. So the goal is the air to vent out here. Yes, you will leak some water out of here, which is very minimal and should not affect your maximum output. But you install the plug in here. Once again, you do not have to over torque this item. You just screw it in. You'll notice that there's a light resistive fit to it. Just put it in until it's snug. The next, we'll go ahead and put the strainer plate on. As I noted before, it's a universal fit, only that you'll make sure that the standoffs that are on here go to the standoffs on the base of the motor on the pump body. You'll use the number 440 by 5/16 screws. So I'm going to pause the video and then we'll come back. All right, we're back. Now the motor is installed. As you'll see, that this is a nice compact design. If you're familiar with the older style Battlers connection pump, this one's about the same in height, but as you can see, much smaller footprint. So that gives you a little more real estate inside your vessel to have other components in there. The difference is with the older style Battlers connection pump is it uses the 4 bolts and you use the nuts as the standoff, where this one here has a strainer plate, so you don't need to put extra screen on that you had to do with the older style pump, being that this strainer plate's built in. But it's nice to see that you can see that there is a much difference in the size of the pump. We'll cover a little bit on the polarity. Most of the brushed motors that you get today, they won't come pre-wired with a connector on it, but you'll have to, solder your own wire and your connectors on there. I recommend at least a 14 AWG wire on a pump. Most of them usually have a red dot or some other color. It could be blue, but most of them mark what side would be the correct for the rotation. I have another pump here, and this one already has a red dot on it. So that's telling me that's where the positive needs to go on the motor. So bear in mind that could and could not be correct, but for most instances, the dot next to the post is generally give you the proper polarity to make the pump work correctly. So if you have just a parts kit's not going to include the hose, the motor, the restrictor, etc. Now, if you're getting the full kit, you'll most likely get some vinyl hose and a restrictor. So basically, at this point, once you solder it up, install your hose, put your restrictor, if it's mounted in your boat, hook it up to that, powered up and you're ready to go. The pump's all done. So we got a battery already here. We'll go do a little quick test so you can see. We have some wind. And that's it, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at battlersconnection@gmail.com. You can contact me on RC Warship Combat. My screen name's Charlie. Or you can reach out on the IRC email list and call me out there, and I'll see what I can do to help. Hope you enjoyed this. Enjoy the product, and I'll see you later.